All right, I want to transition now to Purdue basketball because they are in position to rack up some big-time conference wins very quickly in a few games in a row here as this next stretch of the schedule carries on. This past winter break, Purdue's been very quiet, right? Typically, they have a couple games against inferior opponents. They kind of didn't, right? They took on Auburn on December 21st in that game in Birmingham. And since that loss, they've only played once, and that was an 83-64 home win over Toledo. Braden Smith had 34 points. Trey Kaufman-Red had 23. Fletcher Lawyer had 17. Braden Smith had a double-double. He had 12 assists as well. The team dominated the turnover battle and cruised to an expected victory over an inferior opponent in the Toledo Rockets. That's all we've seen since that Auburn game, and that's why we haven't talked about Purdue basketball in a while, but I thought now was a good time to recircle to them because they have a kind of sneaky big weekend coming up, right? They play Minnesota on Thursday night. They play Northwestern on Sunday evening. I'm going to start with that Minnesota game, right? It's Thursday night on the road, and my question to you is if you remember the last time Purdue went on the road against a conference opponent in the Big Ten, it was an 11-point loss to Penn State. Purdue's 0-2 on the road. They're 2-2 in neutral site games. That means outside of Mackey Arena, they are 2-4, and they haven't won a road game yet this season, right? A true road game yet this season. Minnesota, like all Big Ten teams, has been stellar in its own building. It's very, very difficult to win on the road in the Big Ten no matter who you play, and Purdue exemplified that perfectly with that 11-point loss to Penn State in their first conference game of the year. Purdue is great, right? Purdue is fantastic. Top 25 team. They're number 20 for a reason, but they're being asked to do something on Thursday that they haven't done yet this season, and that is go on the road and beat a conference opponent. Minnesota, one of the weaker teams in the Big Ten. They could finish last. They'll probably finish in the bottom 5 of this 18-team league. But Minnesota, on the road, is still a tough game for Purdue, and it's even if it's not tough, it's Purdue is being asked to do something that they haven't done yet, right? And that's beat a conference opponent on the road. They haven't done that yet this season. It's their time to prove that they can right now against Minnesota. Minnesota got ran over by both Indiana and Michigan State so far this season. They're 0-2 in conference play as a result. But Purdue, in that Minnesota game, the key to me is the question of whether or not they're going to be able to, again, go on the road and knock off a conference opponent like Minnesota. Then a couple days later, they go to play Northwestern, and that's back at Mackey Arena, right? So they return home, and they take on Northwestern. The Wildcats have been rolling since the start of December. They're on a 4-game win streak that includes an overtime win over number 19 at the time, Illinois. All of Northwestern's losses are by 2 possessions or fewer, right? They lost to Iowa on the road. They lost to Butler. They went to Dayton and lost as well. This is a sneaky, underrated home upset spot for Purdue. Minnesota game, sneaky upset spot, not because of Minnesota's quality, but because that game is occurring at Minnesota, and Purdue, again, hasn't won a road game, a true road game at all this year, and honestly looked shaky in their only 2 Big Ten games. They played Penn State and lost by 11 on the road. They hosted Maryland, only won by 5. They needed well over 80 in order to pull out that win. Minnesota, sneaky road game that Purdue might be looking past, perhaps. They shouldn't look past this game. It's a very big one on the road in the Big Ten. They have to start racking up some wins in conference if they're going to have a season with the amount of successes they expect to have. The Northwestern game is difficult, even though it's at Mackey Arena. Again, Northwestern, they're 10-3. They beat number 19 Illinois in overtime, and all of their losses are by 2 possessions or fewer. They haven't lost a game by double digits, or honestly close to double digits so far this season. At Iowa, Butler, and at Dayton. 2 upset spots there, right? Both games appear very winnable. When you look at Purdue's schedule, and I almost didn't talk about Purdue basketball this week, and I would have regretted that, because both games do appear very winnable, but they could be some sneaky upset locations for Purdue. They can't afford another rough loss, in my opinion, if they want to maintain its top 25 status. Certainly, if they lose either one of these games, they're dropping out of the top 25, but that loss to Penn State was difficult. Just get picked off on the road in the Big Ten. They've had some big time. They've lost 4 games this year, right? Penn State, Auburn. They lost to Texas A&M, and they lost to Marquette, right? They're 2-3 against top 25 teams so far this season. They've had some difficult opportunities. going on the road, losing to Marquette, going on the road, losing to Penn State, and neutral site games, not having overwhelming amounts of success either. This isn't a Purdue team that we expect to have the same seasons as they were having with Zach Edey in the past. They are, to some degree, working their way back to that level. But so far, this has still been a top 25 team, and they've beaten top 25 opponents like Ole Miss and Alabama so far this season as well. If we're going to continue to consider them a top 25 team and one of the teams in the top tier of the Big Ten, they've got to start picking up some Big Ten conference wins. Right now, they're 1-1. Neither one of those. That win wasn't convincing, and that loss was concerning. Go on the road against Minnesota and pick up a win. Return home to Northwestern and pick up a win. Go 3-1 in conference play and start ramping up those victories, because Purdue has a light schedule, but not for long, right? They go to Minnesota, they play Northwestern at home, they go to Rutgers, they play Nebraska at home, and they go to Washington, and then they travel to number 9, Oregon. That's their next game against a ranked team, right? So they have 5 games in a row against unranked opponents. Minnesota on the road, winnable. Northwestern, winnable. At Rutgers is a sneaky spot that Purdue has struggled at before. In Piscataway, that's a winnable game. Nebraska at home, slightly more difficult, but still a winnable game. And at Washington, very winnable as well. These are teams that will likely finish with losing records in the conference. This is an opportunity for Purdue to start amounting wins. So a loss in either one of these games this weekend would massively set them back. Not only their momentum, but also their conference record would likely drop to 1-2, 2-2, something along those lines. This is a moment where past Purdue teams would just start piling on wins against Minnesota, Northwestern, Rutgers, Nebraska, Washington. They should be 6-1 in conference play after this stretch. They should be 6-1 and one of the top 5, top 4, top 3 teams in the Big Ten when they go on the road to play Oregon. It's all really just a ramp up to that point, right? If we're going to break up this season into segments, you can break it up into segments that start and end when they play ranked opponents, because they don't play very many in the Big Ten the rest of the year. And I know a finite amount of teams are ranked, but you really circle those games against ranked opponents. You circle the games against IU, right? These next 5 games don't fit either of those categories. It's a real opportunity for Purdue to start ramping up wins. But again, Minnesota on the road, sneaky difficult test. Northwestern at home. Northwestern, a sneaky quality opponent. They could be ranked if a couple balls bounce in different directions in those 3 games that they lost. This is a spot where Purdue needs to establish itself within the conference, establish its footing within the Big Ten, and start to ramp up those wins, win the next 3 after this weekend to prepare for Oregon. Ramp up, be playing your best basketball, round into form ahead of that massive test on the road against the Ducks, because that is going to be where Purdue is tested the most in this stretch of the season. It all starts this Thursday at, I believe, 8:30 p.m. FS1 against Minnesota, and then Northwestern the following Sunday. That's the position where Purdue is in right now. Pick up those 2 wins. Don't leave any doubt, and charge forward to ramp up that momentum and ramp up that quality play before they play Oregon. That's what I'm looking for from the Boilermakers. And if they're going to be a top 25 team, they have to execute twice this weekend, as well as in the few games after that.